This is not the system of government that our elected officials took an oath to uphold. It's staggering that anyone can argue, even in theory or for the sake of nostalgia, for taking 91% of someone's income. Why would anyone work hard and long hours, risk capital over a long period of time, pay insurance, hire employees, struggle with competition, hire lawyers, heaven forbid, and accountants to satisfy increasing government regulations for 9% of the profits? In addition to the moral issue that almost no one wants to talk about, there are differences in the way taxes were calculated and expenses indexed for deductions in the 1950s. There were many more write-offs for expenses. Coupled with inflation and income tax bracket creep upward, there has been a steady devaluation and deduction creep downward. Consider the generational differences. Quote, the high income tax rates in the 1950s were paired with a corporate tax system that allowed companies much more generous deductions for things like business lunches, business travel with spouse, and so forth. Descriptions of 1960s expense account procedures for even entry-level management are enough to make this journalist rather faint with envy. Mr. DeMar continues, what's also different is the exponential increase in entitlements that drive the call for higher taxes on the wealthy. School loan programs, subsidized mortgages, expansion of Social Security, Medicare, and disability payouts, just to name 5. In 1955, there were 8.6 workers paying into Social Security for each beneficiary. Multiply this over all so-called entitlement programs. By 2005, the ratio dropped to about 2 to 1. When Social Security was first proposed, not everybody was in the program. Most government workers, including Congress, were exempt. The worker-to-benefit ratio was around 30 to 1. There is no way to tax our way out of this fiscal crisis. According to the figures in the president's own budget, one for which he has received absolutely 0 votes, the debt will jump to a staggering 102% of GDP at the end of fiscal 2011. It will grow to 105% in the year following and remain at that level as long as the eye can see. None of the new revenue raised by taxing the rich at even higher levels will be used to reduce any debt. It will be spent on more government programs because that is how Democrats get elected. And that's a sad state of affairs, folks, when we think about where we stand from an economic standpoint. And we talked in the first hour a bit about the fact that businesses are refusing to invest, holding their money, protecting their profits because of uncertainty. And then we get this little bit of insight from Paul Krugman in understanding where they think the fair share is. You counter that with some sober thinking on the part of Mr. DeMar when he asks the relevant and moral question about how much is enough. What right do we have to take from one to give to another? This Robin Hood notion. I don't agree with Rush Limbaugh and his characterization of President Obama as Santa Claus, because at least Santa Claus had a willing cadre of elves up in the North Pole that were making the toys that he was distributing. No, what we have here is kind of a Robin Hood situation, but not in the fabled story of Robin Hood, where he was taking from the king who had seized money improperly and handed it out to the poor. No, this is the king himself taking from not only the well-to-do, but the middle class, and redistributing it to those who are quite capable in most cases. of dealing for themselves. So you throw all that into a container, you mix it up, and you ask yourself, well, we can just spend our way out of this, right? We can just tax our way out of this, right? Well, not so fast. None other than our tax-challenged Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner came out with the statement this week indicating that he thinks we should just simply lift the debt limit ceiling. And of course, that magnificent leader and bastion of conservatism, leader of the Senate, Harry Reid, I'm sorry, that was a rather harsh transition to sarcasm. I didn't give you a fair warning on that, but that was sarcasm, folks. Said that, when the need arises, not if, but when the need arises to raise the debt ceiling, we're going to do it. Because that's what we do. This week, Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner, this past Friday, said that Congress should stop placing legal limits on the amount of money the government can borrow and effectively lift the debt limit to infinity. Now, at first, when I saw this, I thought it had to have been one of the, the right-wing satire sites or whatever, trying to have some fun. That there's no way in the world that anybody in their right mind could make a statement like this. But as it turns out, it was in fact a direct quote. On Bloomberg TV, on the Political Capital show with host Al Hunt, Mr. Hunt asked Geithner if he believes we ought to just eliminate the debt ceiling. Mr. Geithner enthusiastically said, "Oh, absolutely." You do? Will you propose that? Mr. Hunt asked. Well, Geithner, unlike his boss, the president, apparently does have some idea of the Constitution and what it says, because he responded, "Well, this is something only Congress can solve." Geithner said, "Congress put it on itself. We've had 100 years of experience with it, and I think only once, last summer, did people decide to use it to threaten default on the American credit for the first time in history as a tool for political advantage. And that's not a tenable strategy." Mr. Geithner, I have to take exception with you because there have been times in the past when the American people have expressed their dissatisfaction with the almost de rigueur approach to raising the debt ceiling. But yes, in 2010, the American people did make it known that they did not think that this was a good thing to do. Many in our Congress, including then Senator Obama, when the debt ceiling was raised previously, said that that was a failure on our part. But when he got in office and decided to do it, I guess it wasn't so much a failure. But it wasn't that the people were trying to use it to threaten default on the American credit. No, what the American people were using it for was to threaten Congress that it was time for them to get the spending problem under control. And the credit rating bureaus told us that that was the key. Simply raising the debt ceiling was at best a stopgap measure. But the better thing was to come up with balanced budgets and to cut spending. That was the tenable strategy. Mr. Hunt then asked, "Is now the time to eliminate it, the debt ceiling?" "It would have been time a long time ago to eliminate it," Geithner said. "The sooner, the better." Geithner's Treasury Department quietly warned at the end of October that Treasury would reach current legal limit on the federal government's debt by about the end of this calendar year. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid said last week that the Senate stands ready to increase the debt limit by another $2.4 trillion. Quote, "If it has to be raised, we'll raise it," Reid said. I am aghast. Like I said, when I first heard this, I thought it was a spoof. That someone had simply come up with this meme, and they were, trying to have some fun at Treasury Secretary Geithner's expense. It is disturbing that people like Secretary Geithner can proffer this kind of an argument with a straight face. At some point, the piper must be paid. Our creditors insist on being paid. There is a point at which we as a country can no longer continue to fund our debt. Many would argue, and I tend to agree with them, that we're probably already at that point. That in reality, bankruptcy may be our only option. But when you have people in positions of power and leadership that think this way, it is just absolutely disturbing and mind-boggling. But it's who we have. It's what we have. It's who we are. It's what we've become. Unless we, the people, finally stand up and say, no, it's time to stop. Do you think it's time to stop? I think it's time to stop. But that's just me. Well, you're listening to the Palmetto Conservative Show here on the CB Media Network. As we round third and head towards home here into the last couple of segments of the program, I am cognizant that, if you will, this is our Thanksgiving program. And I'd ask that you bear with me and stick with me here towards the end of the show as we take a look at Thanksgiving proclamations of the past. And if I could, share with you some thoughts as to why I'm thankful to live in the worst possible country in the world, except for all the rest. Stick with us. We'll be back on the other side. News Busted is next. Stay tuned.
Busted. I'm Jody Miller. Let's get started. MSNBC's Chuck Todd said that Republicans must now embrace so-called immigration reform to compete for Democrat votes. And it wouldn't hurt if Republicans started reaching out to dead voters, too. In related news, President Obama may push immigration reform as a thank you to Latino voters. In fact, Obama's thinking of giving legal immigrants the same benefits illegal immigrants already receive. After last week's election loss, Republicans have begun soul-searching. Meanwhile, Democrats are still waiting for their Obama phones. Los Angeles voters passed an initiative requiring porn actors filming in LA to wear condoms. Great. So the left's push for bigger government is even ruining porn. An Idaho woman received a kidney for her daughter from a man she met while playing Farmville on Facebook. Yeah.